Welcome everybody who's trickling in. Just so you know, there's a handful or so sessions going on right now, and you've landed in data validation using custom data rules. So if you didn't mean to get here, you've still got time to jump over to another session. If you did mean to get here, thanks for joining. I know it might have been a challenging decision with so many sessions going on. As you can see on my screen here, I've got Menti open. If you have used Menti, you'll know exactly what to do. If you haven't, you can just jump over to menti.com, put in that 6-digit code. I'll go ahead and put it in the chat. Oh, that's to the panelists. Maybe I should give it to everybody. And then just let me know where your voting is closed. No. Let me know where you're connecting from today. I did the same thing yesterday in my session, but I like to travel and I like to know where people are coming from. So feel free to throw in where you're connecting from today. If you do choose Europe or other, let us know exactly where you are there. Oh, it is closed. That's so weird. All right, hold on a second. Let's get the snafus out of the way early. I'll restart it. Hey, PDX, awesome. Sorry for those who have voted. I'm gonna nix them and we'll start again. All right, so same website, same code. So if you're already there, you can just refresh. Let me know where you're connecting in today. Again, if you're is it closed again? What is happening here?
I think when you scroll toward the bottom, Daniel, there's a little lock button that says open voting.
I think it's good now.
Okay.
Yeah, we're good. I promise the rest of the session will be much more successful than this. If you do Europe or other, let us know in the chat where you're from. I didn't want to put like 50 options on here and then nothing could be legible or visible.
You're planning your next trip, right, Callahan?
Maybe.
Yeah.
We'll see. Again, there was a handful or so sessions available at this time slot. So this is the data validation using custom data rules. If you've stumbled into the wrong one, you've got time to head over to another one. And if you're here on purpose, awesome, thank you. I'll let this go for another minute or so, and then we'll jump right into the session, the fun part. Menti are fun, but not as fun as learning QuickBase. New features, all that good stuff. So it looks like Central. I think Central won in my session yesterday too. I always thought one of the coasts would win, but Central Time representing, which is pretty awesome. All right, let's jump out of Menti. Let's jump into PowerPoint and let's learn about how you can data validate in QuickBase. So I'll bring this over. All right. So I'm Daniel Callahan. I'm a product trainer here at QuickBase. I'll be hosting this session today. It is being recorded, including the chat and Q&A, and that's just so that when we put this recording up on the Empower platform, you can read through all the questions and chat that were asked. That way, if you didn't catch everything, you can get it that way. As I mentioned, the recording will be available on the Empower platform, and that will be accessible through at a minimum early August. So if you don't grab the recording by the end of the week or next week, don't worry. This one and all the other ones will be available on there. Since we are using Zoom webinars as it's a virtual event, we will be using the Q&A and chat function. So as moderators, I have Eliza Little, Freddie Sabs, and Kirk Trakey from QuickBase. They'll kind of be hiding in the shadows, answering questions for you guys. Because the chat can get moving pretty quickly, we recommend using the Q&A if you have specific questions about the topic. It's easier for the moderators to kind of keep track of those and mark them as answered, whereas the chat will get flying and they can't really mark things off. So if you just want to use the chat to say hello, say where you're from, that'd be great. And then any technical questions can go in there as well. To end the session, we're hoping to have about 10 or 15 minutes of open Q&A with myself and the 3 moderators about QuickBase, about this session, anything like that. We will have a hard cutoff at 2 Eastern, so definitely throw in as many questions in that 10 to 15 minutes you have. If they're not answered, you can always jump into the public Slack that we have going as well. Lastly, we do ask that you review the session to give us some feedback. It being virtual, it being a session that we've done before, we'd love to know if we're on the right track, if it needs to be longer, shorter, more or less exercises, anything like that. So please provide feedback. That way we can make changes in it and improve what we're doing. All right, so let's jump into the agenda now that the housekeeping stuff's out of the way. I'll introduce myself, then I'll introduce a choose your adventure element to this session. And that means you can either build along, since we'll be building formulas, or you can follow along at your own pace and then have the recording to take action with those formulas later if you'd like. After that, I'll introduce the story and use case so we know who we're role playing as, what we're trying to solve, and all that. Then we'll actually learn about data validation using custom data rules. We have to learn about formulas a little bit because they're powered by formulas. So I'll be covering the basics of formulas, the markers in formulas and functions, and a few examples. After that, we'll do a very quick recap. Oh, I'm sorry, we'll do 3 exercises, potentially a 4th one, which is a bonus one. It's my favorite one, so I'd love to get to it. However, we did receive feedback from yesterday's sessions that some of them were a little fast, and so I would rather focus on the 3 main exercises and do those at a good pace rather than trying to cram the 4th one in there. Then we'll do a quick recap. Then I've got 1 slide on resources, 4 major resources for you all to use. Then we'll have that Q&A that I mentioned. And in this deck, if it's available, there's an appendix with all the formulas, but the formulas are also in the Exchange app that we'll be using. All right, so let me introduce myself. Again, I'm Daniel Callahan. I've been at QuickBase for 5 years. I'm currently a product trainer in the customer education team. I started on the customer care team, which is our support team. I had a couple of roles there for about a year. Then I switched to an internal facing role as an application developer for about 2.5 years. And then at the turn of this year, I switched over to product trainer. I'm excited to be in an external role so that I can teach and learn from new and old builders. Outside of QuickBase, based on the Menti question and this picture, I do love traveling and hiking outdoors. Conversely to that, I also love being indoors, reading and designing Lego creations. Nice. Audio's good? Okay, cool. So at this point, I want to introduce that choose your own adventure element to this. If you're comfortable with formulas, you could probably build along. We're not doing anything crazy in formulas. If you're newer to formulas or not too comfortable with them, I've got a Menti question, and then we're going to actually look at the final product in the custom data rule. If after those 2 things you're kind of thinking, I'm not too sure, I would just follow along and then use the recording later. So let's jump into Menti really quick. And let's answer this question if you don't mind. That way I can maybe guide you a little bit on what you should be doing. And I know Kirk is already going to be answering, I think, in QuickBase formulas.
The pressure is on.
So I would say if you're answering in the first 2 slots, the what are formulas, which is awesome. Nobody has chosen that one. Or if you've gone with the beginner one, you still kind of copy paste your formulas. What I would do is take a look at the end result formula that we're going to do here. Look at what functions we've used, and if it's still looking like hieroglyphics, then definitely follow along. If you're like, I think I can swing that, definitely build along. If you trip up along the way while you're building along, again, we'll have the recording here, and then the chat moderators will help out as well. All right. Oh, actually, let me jump into QuickBase. I'm going to grab the app. And I want to show you the end result. That way you can get a little idea of what we're doing here. And you'll notice, if you haven't used custom data rules before, we're actually going into the advanced settings section of a table. And let me zoom in for everybody. I'm notorious at forgetting that, so I'm actually kind of excited that I remembered that this time. I heard 200% was the sweet spot. So this is what our end formula is going to look like. And I'll try and get the whole thing on here. I'll go down to 175. Okay, awesome. So it fits. So this is what we're going to end with. You can see we're using a little bit of HTML, a couple functions, list, if, today, days. So if this is making sense to you, definitely build along. If not, you can follow along, and I'll be doing each of these sections one at a time. So it's not like we're going to type this whole thing out at once. All right. Oops. Let's jump back up to. Okay, and you should have received some type of communication to have a Builder account open. If you don't have one by chance, just head over to quickbase.com/builder. Throw in your email, your personal email address, so it's not linked with your corporate email address. And then once you open the Builder account, you'll immediately receive an email where you need to verify it. Please do that so you don't get tripped up building or downloading anything from the Exchange, anything like that. So if you don't have a Builder account, I'll hang tight here. For those of you that do, thanks for doing that. And thanks for your patience while we hang here for just a minute. The reason we recommend a Builder account is not everybody is an account admin, so not everybody can actually create apps in their company's QuickBase account. Sometimes app admins don't want kind of test or temporary apps like this to be littered in their app list. And then lastly, I think most, if not all, QuickBase employees have a Builder account, and I have one to build Frankenstein apps. I test out new features. It starts out as a very clean app, and then it just kind of devolves into different features and that I'm testing out and stuff. So highly recommend it as kind of a sandbox or testing ground for yourselves.
Hey, Daniel, is the app the Virtual Empower 2020 AVI printer repair tracker?
Yep, and that's the next step here is we're all going to head over to the Exchange. So based on your experience, you'll either have the one on the left where you'll see the Exchange at the bottom of this Learning and Help column, or you may have it at the top of the Learning and Help column. Either way, find that Learning and Help column and either scroll down and find Exchange, or at the very top, just see Explore Sample Apps. Once you're there, like Kirk mentioned, you can just type in AVI or AVI printer. Let me get rid of those annotations.
The link is in the chat too.
Awesome, thank you. All right, perfect. So if you type in AVI printer, you'll find one app. Go ahead and click get this app, or like Kirk mentioned, there's a link in there, which is helpful as well. Once you have this app, go ahead and kind of put it on the back burner, as we're going to be covering the story, custom data rules, and formulas. And then we're going to jump back into the app and do the exercises. So I'll keep moving as you guys can grab the app or let it download while we're moving forward. If you have any problems with finding the app, throw it in the chat and the moderators will help you out. So let's talk about this story and use case. As you know, we are app builders for a company named Avi Printer, and they are a big player in the printer and printer repair business. You can tell we're running out of use cases at QuickBase. Printers are cool, but it's not a very exciting company or anything, but that's what we're going with. About a month ago, we replaced spreadsheets and paper and clipboards for service techs who work on the printers and repair them, and their managers. And since that time period, the managers have bubbled up 3 following issues that they need solving, as it's causing a ton of headache for them. So the first one is the techs are actually going into the app and putting in dates in the past. Now, obviously, you can't really log a date in the past, and so we want to stop them from doing that. Secondly, is Avi Printer has a 30-day follow-up window that the techs need to adhere to, and some of the techs are putting dates outside of that window. So maybe there was a 45-day policy and we've changed it, and they're not used to that. Either way, we want to stop it. Stop the app from accepting anything outside that 30-day window. Lastly, and I usually jumble my words on this one, but each printer has a heat sensor, and each sensor outputs a reading. And the reading is always between 0 and 200. And some of the techs are putting in -150, maybe somehow their finger is slipping over to the negative sign, or they're putting in 500. Either way, we don't want them to be inputting a value and it being accepted when it's out of that range. So as app builders, we recently heard about a newish feature named custom data rules, and we decided that we want to learn about it and utilize it to solve the problems for the techs and their managers. So let's run and learn a little bit of background on custom data rules. First of all, what are they? So the main piece here is that they are a table level form of data validation. Now, we currently have form rules, but that's form specific. So custom data rules are at the table level. And it's custom conditions similar to form rules and error messages that will notify the user when a rule has been broken and how to fix it. And with it being at the table level, it's applied and enforced across several data entry methods, including importing. So maybe your department imports a spreadsheet every week, and there's kind of junk data being imported via this spreadsheet. We can create a custom data rule or multiple rules so that the import doesn't happen or is aborted when there's data in the spreadsheet that doesn't adhere to those rules. In addition to importing, it's also enforced at the grid edit level, also within our API, Kanban, and calendar reports. So maybe you're using a Kanban for project management and you don't want a user to move that project from in progress to completed unless other criteria is met. And so we can do that with custom data rules as well. And a little definition on data validation. In a QuickBase world, it essentially means not allowing records to be added or updated if the data in those records doesn't meet your business workflow standards. And we're gonna, again, do those exercises to show exactly how this works. The last key piece about custom data rules is that they're actually powered by a QuickBase formula and the function or functions that you put in that formula. So if you think of custom data rules, when we go back in there, you're gonna see a box, and it's just a formula text box. So anything that you can put in a formula text, a normal formula text field, you can also put in custom data rules. We'll touch base on the basics of the formulas that you can put in there, and hopefully it'll kind of get your mind going on how you can apply it for your business needs. So next, why do they exist? Believe it or not, you guys asked for them. This was the #1 feature request on User Voice, which is our customer feedback platform. And essentially what was happening is when a user grid edits, any form rules that you have in place that act as data validation are not enforced. And so if somebody decides to use grid edit to edit multiple records, rather than using the form to edit one record, those form rules didn't take place, and it was a way to kind of bypass or circumvent those form rules. So while we were addressing this issue, we figured we should make it even more comprehensive, and that's why it works for not only grid edit, but those other data entry methods like importing, Kanban reports, calendar reports, and the API. So we really just decided that form rules weren't robust or comprehensive enough, and we wanted to make something stronger for data validation, as it's super important. You know, you have to think, without data validation, data integrity can kind of suffer in your app, and with that, reports may become less useful or less effective if there's bad data in there. So we wanted a way to help mitigate that. Speaking a little bit about form rules, I want to cover form rules and custom data rules because there is a little bit of overlap. So with form rules, you know, you can say, when this condition is met, abort the save. But you can also do other things, such as displaying fields or sections or tabs on a form. You can make certain fields read-only or editable. And those last two things, the displaying fields and making fields editable or read-only, are something you can't do with custom data rules. But you can do the first one, which is aborting the save. The thing with custom data rules is you can be much more more robust with it, with how you're doing it. And so they can kind of be used in tandem, and it also depends on your use case. Maybe you only have one form that's used by everybody. You know, you can stick with form rules. But if you have a workflow that includes importing, or grid edit is used often with your end users, you're going to want to leverage custom data rules to data validate that way. So the main thing here is requiring fields across all data entry methods, restricting what users can put in, which, like I mentioned in the story, we don't want those texts to be putting in something outside of the 30-day window, or something in the past, or outside of that 0 to 200 range. And then the great thing with this is you can validate data before it gets into your app. And obviously you can't do that with form rules because it's not enforced when importing. But if you have a fresh table, you know, rather than throwing in a bunch of data that hasn't been groomed at all, you can go ahead and set the rules prior to the import so that no bad data gets in your app. So before we jump into the exercises, we need to learn a little bit about formulas, because as I mentioned, they are what powers custom data rules. So let's learn about the basics first. This first slide is just going to be different markers that you're going to see while building formulas. So the first thing is brackets, and those are for quick-base fields. So anything that you see inside of brackets is the name of a quick-base field. So if you want to input a field into your quick-base formula box, you can type it out by doing bracket, field name, and then closing bracket. Quotes are designated for text. So anything that you see in between quotes is just a string of text. In conjunction with this, you'll also see ampersand used, and that's for stringing values, or what you'll commonly hear in quick-base lingo, or not even quick-base lingo, but maybe database lingo, is concatenating. So we'll have an example that shows how the ampersand is used on the next slide. Next up are parentheses. So this is kind of a twofold symbol here. Is A, you'll see it for quick-base functions, and we have over 150 functions, and I'll share that page with you in the resources guide, so you have access to all those functions. And we'll also have an example that shows us using multiple functions, so you'll see those parentheses. And then outside of that, obviously with order of operations, you'll see parentheses as well. After, you'll see and or. So this is when you want to set multiple conditions, when you want to say this is true or this is true. And we'll have an example that shows using and or as well. And then last is the double slash, and that's for commenting. And I'll show you the value and power of commenting when we actually start to do these exercises from scratch. But really what it does is it allows you to type notes inside of a formula field because anything after 2 slashes is omitted within the formula. So QuickBase won't evaluate or execute anything after those double slashes. All right, let's take a look at a couple basic formulas here. So first on the left is I've kind of outlined what you'll be seeing from the previous slide. So we're going to see brackets, a couple ampersands, and some quotes. On the right, inside the box, is the formula. So we're doing the first name field and the last name field, and we want to string those together with a space in between. So we're doing first name and then quote, space, quote, and that's to create the space between the first and last name. Another ampersand, and then the last name. If there wasn't a space in between those quotes, it would just be a condensed first, last name with no space. So in this example, this person's first name is John, their last name is Frusciante, and the output of this formula text field, which would probably be called full name, would be John Frusciante. Okay, let's look at another one. We're using the brackets. This time we have an arithmetic sign, which is plus, and then we're doing parentheses to show the functions. So again, in the box, we've got hire date. Our example here is January 1st of 2020. We're going to be adding days, and in between the parentheses is the number of days we've designated. So you could do 20 days, 30 days, whatever you want to do. And then we're closing that. And what we're doing here is we're adding a full year or 365 days to that hire date. The next level in QuickBase formulas are conditional formulas. So rather than just having text like we have here, we're going to be adding a condition, and the most common one in QuickBase is the if function. So the if function, it's really popular and it's very powerful as well, and it uses an if then else logic. And I'll show a couple examples here, but what that means is you're defining a statement and you're saying if that statement is true, then output this. If it's not true or else, output that. And let's look at a couple examples here. So we would use this if we had like a sales price field. And what we're saying here is if the price override is greater than 0, meaning there is a value in that field, so this record has a price override, then use that. If we don't, then use the list price. So maybe our list price is 100, our price override is 50. If a record has that 50 value in it, we're going to use the 50 instead of the 100. And let's look at another one. So the prior one was formula numeric. This one will be formula text because we're spitting out a value within those quotes over there on the right. So what we're saying here is if today is greater than the due date, and in terms of QuickBase, the greater than for date means past or after. So we're saying if today is after the due date and the status of that project is not completed, then it's overdue. Otherwise, it's still on time. And what this will do is it'll dynamically evaluate the conditions and then spit out the output. So if today was June 3rd and it's not completed, we're still okay. It'll be on time. But tomorrow, if the project still hasn't been completed, the 4th is after the 3rd, so it'll be overdue. I'll take a short little pause here. If you guys have any questions with formulas, I know most of you may be comfortable with formulas, but for everybody to get value out of this session, I wanted to cover basic formulas and conditions since we'll be using them. And I don't think everybody has used custom data rules. So at this point, you guys can all jump back into QuickBase, and we're going to start the exercises. And what I'll do is I'll be reviewing each of the problem statements, and then we'll jump into QuickBase and do an exercise that's completely geared for that problem statement. And just to review the first one that we outlined when we were first talking about the story was that the text we're putting in follow-up dates in the past. So let's jump into QuickBase. I'll go ahead and wipe this out, and I'll actually head back to my table. And what everybody will want to do is just head to the repair tickets table and then click settings. And on the left, you'll see advanced settings, bottom left. Go ahead and click on that. And when you scroll to the very bottom, you'll see a custom data rules section. Go ahead and check the box. And let me move my camera a little bit. There we go. Okay. So what we wanted to do here was essentially disallow anybody from putting in a follow-up date in the past. So we're going to start with an if, which is our condition. Oh, let me zoom in again. And let me know if this isn't enough and 200 needs to, I need to zoom into 200. We'll start with today, the today function. And the date, the field we're looking for, sorry, is if you type in follow, you'll see a field called date to follow. So go ahead and grab that. And depending on how much you're zoomed in or out, your choose fields and functions box down here might actually be over here on the right. But once you click in the formula box, it'll appear either below or on the right here. And similar to that example, we also want to talk about the ticket status. So let's go find that field by just typing in status. Go ahead and grab that. And in QuickBase, not equals to or not equal to is an exclamation point and an equal sign. You can also do the double caret. Either one will be evaluated the same in QuickBase. And we want to throw completed in quotes. So what we're saying here is if today is after the follow-up date and the ticket isn't completed, the rule is broken. And now we want to define what that rule is. I do this with the rules. I say rule 1, and that may be because your end users have a cheat sheet of what the rules are. They may not, so this is completely optional. Sometimes it's just helpful when they see the error message that they know what rule it is. So now we want to write out, and this is what they'll see when they save the record and the save is aborted. So we want to give them as much context on what was wrong and how to fix it. So we want to say the follow-up date is in the past. Please adjust the follow-up update so that it's in the future. And I'll hang tight here for a second. You can add your closing parenthesis on this line, or if you kind of created new lines when you first did the if function, you can just use that one. Now what I like to do here, and the end user won't see this, this is mostly for admins or app builders. So maybe you created this rule and somebody isn't familiar with it. So you want to give them a little bit of context. And you can just say this rule enforces our requirement for follow-up dates to be in the future. On top of this, in formulas and in custom data rules, I also stamp it as well. And this is helpful for other builders who come in here. Oh, not quite on the 30th. So they know, they're getting feedback it's not working or something's going on, they know who to talk to. And I also like to say when it was last modified. Maybe this rule has been in place for a year. It's not what it originally was. You can talk to somebody who last updated it. So I'll hang tight here just in case anybody needs to catch up. And this is our first form rule, and we'll test it out. You guys can feel free to test it out as well, but I'll do it so everybody can see. If you have any questions, please throw them in the chat. Oh, I see some people appreciated my chili peppers reference. Nice. And this commenting here is similar to when you go to a field properties and it has the, I think it's a comments tab next to usage. It's similar to that. It's just, you know, any context in the database is really helpful, and commenting can be used to do that. The exclamation point here is so it's not equal to, because if the ticket is completed, we don't want this rule to fire. We only care if it's not completed. Like I said, you can also use this in QuickBase, but recently we added a not equal to, as that's more common in databases. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this. Yeah, so that's a good, somebody's asking about the else rule. With an if state function, you don't have to do an else if you don't want anything else to happen. But in our case, we're just saying, if this one condition is met, then do this, because we want that rule to pop up and be enforced. So let's hit exit here. What I want to do is show you how it works in import, and this is going to be kind of a lame example because I'm importing one record, but I just want you to see what it looks like when you import. After I do this import, we'll all edit one record together, and that way you can see it working from the form as well. So what I'm doing here is I'm importing one record that has a follow-up date in the past, just so that you can see what happens here. And you can see row fail number 1, and then it gives that verbatim message that we wrote. So if you had multiple, you know, maybe you're importing a spreadsheet with 1,000 records, and 300 of them are bad, or they're not up to your standards, then it would list out the whole list here. That way you would know to go back to the spreadsheet and fix those errors. On top of that, the 700 that were clean would not import. And that's because we don't want partial imports, because then you'd have to keep track of what came in and what didn't. So if anything fails, it's a complete fail. All right, so let's jump into any record here. And go ahead and edit that record. And if you scroll towards the bottom of the form, you'll see that field called date to follow up right here. And go ahead and just put any date in the past and then hit save. And you'll see very similar to a form rule. In fact, it may be identical. And it's saying what rule was broken. And again, you can put whatever you want in this message, you know, whatever works for your specific needs, but just know that custom data rules are powered by a formula text field. So whatever you've done creatively in formula text fields, you can mirror here. So if you want to add a link to, you know, maybe they've broken protocol or something, and you want to add a link so they can refamiliarize themselves with what happened, you can do that. All right, so let's jump into the second exercise here. And that was in regards to our 30-day window that we require. So again, techs are putting a value outside of that, and it's breaking protocol. It's not helping with reports. It's making it so our data integrity is kind of degrading over time. So let's just jump right back into the app, and let's add to our custom data rule so that we can include a rule for this as well. So back to advanced settings, back to the bottom here, and I'll widen this box as much as I can. I think I'm at 175, okay. So the first thing we need to do here is actually remove this closing parenthesis. And we need to add a comma because we are going to add another condition. Now there's multiple ways to do multiple if statements. I'm sure Kurt could chime in and have his own way, but I just write another if function here. And now what we want to do is grab that follow date to follow field again. You can just come up here and copy it and paste it, or you can come back in your fields and functions drop down box here and search for it as well. And now what we want to do is, we're not just doing today, but we're doing today plus 30 days, because that's the approved window that Abby printer allows for text to put in a follow-up date. And now this is rule number 2. So we want to tell these texts what's wrong and how to fix it here. So we'll say the follow-up date is outside of the accepted 30-day range or window. Please adjust the follow-up date so that it's within the next 30 days. Now what you could do here is you could add something that shows them the range. So again, leaving this kind of basic, but again, it's a formula text field. So rather than just telling them, hey, you need to adjust it to a date that's within the next 30 days, you could give them the range. You could build the range in here for them so that they know, oh, well, I mean, today would be pretty obvious as the first day, but showing them 30 days in the future would be helpful. And again, I'm just going to copy the 3 lines of comments and paste that in here. And then I'm going to change the first line because it's a different rule. This rule enforces our requirement for follow-up dates to be within the next 30 days. Now we have some if functions that we need to close, and you can see QuickBase is unhappy. It's kind of given us a little note here with this yellow highlight. So we need to first do is close the second if that we just created. And you can see when you're clicked outside of it, it shows you what it matches with. And then we want to close the second one as well. And now you can see it hopped up here. I'll hang tight here so that everybody can catch up. We've essentially replicated the first rule. We've just changed the conditions. And so the hardest part about getting this second if to kind of play nicely in here is making sure that you removed this original closing parenthesis and replaced it with a comma. That way QuickBase knows to go to the next if function. And then make sure you close both of those if functions. So we're doing really well on time. So I don't mind hanging out here for a second, and then we should be able to cover the bonus exercise as well. I don't see any questions trickling in, so I think. Oh, somebody asks if how many. I won't say infinite because I'm sure there's a self-imposed limit you should have, but somebody's asking how many if functions we can have in a custom rule. And again, it's just like a formula text box. You can have as many as you need, I guess, dozens of if functions kind of cascading. Okay, let's go ahead and move to the third exercise. And what I'll do when we finish the bonus exercise is I'm going to have the finished product up here for pretty much during the Q&A and stuff. So you'll have a solid amount of time to look at it, to catch up if you need to. Okay. All right. And a reminder, exercise 3 was the heat lamp sensor in the printer. And the techs are using a scanner to read the output. And it will always be between 0 and 200. But for whatever reason, they're not putting 0 to 200. Sometimes they're putting 201, maybe just to mess with us. Sometimes they're putting negative 150. You know, their hand slid down the keyboard like piano keys and got to the negative key before hitting 150. Whatever reason, they're not staying within that range. And so we want to add a custom data rule to go ahead and enforce that. So let's jump right back into, oh, I'm sorry. Before we do that, let's save what we have for number 2 and let's go test it. Proof is in the pudding. So go ahead and hit save and exit settings and then jump into any record. And let's go ahead and put a follow-up date a couple months down the line here. So we'll go with October 8th. So if I click save here, I get the error message saying, hey, rule 2 was broken. We're being told why it was broken and how to fix it. Now let's jump back into our advanced settings here and go back into the custom data rule. Sometimes I forget to test, so I'm sorry. But I know everybody wants to make sure what we're doing is actually working. Okay, awesome. Let me widen this. Okay. So we want to make sure that that range is being honored. So again, let's remove these parentheses. Let's add a comma after the text of the second rule to tell QuickBase, hey, we're going to be adding a third rule here. And then let's do another if. And if you want, since you know we have to close 3 if functions, you can go ahead and type them all right now. It may not be happy because we haven't filled anything in for the third one, but however your brain works, you can take care of that now or we can get to it later. So we're actually introducing a new field here. So let's jump into our fields and functions and let's type in, I think it's lamp. Yes, the bottom one, lamp heat level in degrees Celsius. So go ahead and click on that. And we want to say if it's less than 0 or, and let's grab that field by highlighting it and pasting it, or you can grab it again from your list. You can type or capital or lowercase. It's not case sensitive. I believe if you type it in capital letters, QuickBase will put it in lowercase anyways. And this is back to that basic formula example slide where we had and or to kind of have multiple conditions. And our second condition is greater than 200. So what we're saying here is if the lamp, if the text put in a output reading of less than 0 or more than 200, rule 3 will fire. And we'll tell them why. Combining words here. The heat level reading must be between 0 and 200. Please correct the value so that it is within that range. And then we can, we can grab this again, the comments, and paste that. And then let's change this third one. Reinforces our requirement for text to input a value between 0 and 200. And let me scroll up a hair. Okay, we'll sit tight here. So I've got a question from Bart about, will this stop with the first rule if it is an error and not look at the second rule? That is correct. And we're actually going to test that and we're going to fix that, which is the bonus exercise. So thank you for asking. Essentially what happens here is if if rule 1 and rule 3 are broken, the current way that this is designed is it's going to break for rule 1. The tech would then save it, or they would change the follow-up date so that it doesn't break rule 1. And then they're going to then they're going to get an error saying rule 3 was broken. So what we've done so far is we've solved what the tech managers were asking for, but we haven't solved it in the most efficient and effective way. And that's what we're going to do with the fourth exercise, is we're actually going to list the rules so that if somebody breaks multiple rules, whether it's 1 and 3, 1 and 2, 2 and 3, it's going to say, hey, you broke both of these rules. That way they only edit the record once and they don't have to do it twice. Before we get there, I'll hang tight here for just another second. And we'll test this one. And maybe we can test this in grid edit and we'll see what happens. So if everybody's good, I'll go ahead and hit save. I'll come back to this for the fourth exercise so you can see everything again. And I know for folks that are following along, we always say, hey, the recording's available. But I know it's not as fun kind of getting it after the fact. So I'll try and stay within this custom data rule towards the end so you can catch up if you need to. Okay, I think I hit save. I'll do it again. Then let's hit exit. I don't know what's happening there. If you get that too, just click on your repair tickets table. Before we hit grid edit, we need to put a couple of fields on this report. Otherwise, when we click grid edit, we won't be able to test it out. So on any of these field headers, click this little down arrow and do add a column. And let's go find date to follow up and the lamp heat level in degrees Celsius. I think for my own good, I'll rename this field the next time I do this session so it doesn't trip me up as much. Okay, so we've got these two fields now within our report. So let's go ahead and click grid edit. And let's do a combination of breaking the rules. So let's do date to follow up. Let's break rule number 1 and put it in the past. Sorry, I was getting ahead of myself. So we'll do May 5th. And then let's also break rule number 3 and let's do 500. For the next one, since we broke 1 and 3, let's break 1 and 2. So we'll do another date in the past. And we can't break 1 and 2, can we? No, let's break 2 and 3 then. So we'll put a date more than 30 days in the future. And let's do -200 here. So we've broken rule 1 and 3 by putting something in the past and then the value outside of this range. And then we've broken rule 2 and 3 by putting something more than 30 days in the future and a value outside of that 0 to 200 range. So if we click save, you'll notice the first thing QuickBase does in the background is it highlights the records in red that broke the rules. And then it gives you a little heads up here. So record 1 broke rule 1 and record 2 broke rule 2. And that goes back to Bart's question. Well, we actually broke multiple rules, but QuickBase isn't showing that because it's only showing the first condition that was missed. So again, it's solving the problem by aborting the save of the record. But once they fix these two things, they're gonna have to go back and fix the second rule that was broken. So let's hit OK. Let's hit cancel. You guys can hang tight back in your repair tickets table. And I'll go ahead and jump into PowerPoint and we'll go into the fourth exercise. So the fourth one, like I mentioned, is we want to display multiple errors simultaneously. So some combination of these 3 rules, or maybe you, like with form rules, you have 5, 10, 15 different form rules for aborting the save. Whatever number of rules you have, we want any combination of those errors to be displayed simultaneously. That way for the text, it's as effective as possible. So let's jump right back into QuickBase. We'll go back into our advanced settings to open up the custom data rule. And let me make this as large as possible. Okay, I'll make it fit after we put it in there. So let's go ahead and go to line 1, and let's give ourselves a couple lines to work with here. So like I mentioned, we want to use the list function. And what you do with the list function is you define a delimiter because you're listing things out. So that delimiter could be a space, it could be a pipe, it could be a hyphen. What we're going to do is we're actually going to delimit these with breaks, because what we want to do is when we list out the different errors, rather than it being a big blob of text, we want each rule to kind of have its own little spot or paragraph. That way, from a legibility standpoint, it's super easy. So let's do a break, and then let's do another break. What this double break is doing is not only are we shifting the second rule to the next line, but we're also adding another space, so we actually have a line in between them. So let's go ahead and delete this closing parenthesis because we need to go to the very bottom of the formula and put it there. And then after you add your delimiter with the list function, you do a comma, because you're saying, hey, list the following things with this delimiter. And these are the following things, are all the if statements. And we need to make a couple changes here as well. We actually need to close each if so that it's self-contained. And that's because we're telling the list function to list things out. And we need to give it multiple things to list. So we're saying, hey, list rule 1 and rule 2 if they're both broken. So we're going to recontain these by closing, by re-adding the closing parenthesis up at the top here. So all I did here was go in front of the comma and do a closing parenthesis, and you'll notice that it's matched with this if function. And we want to do that with the second one and the third one. And we know QuickBase is going to be upset because we've got a ton of extra closing parentheses here. Now, another thing that I want to do is, rather than closing this whole thing, I'm going to add an ampersand, again, to string or concatenate some text, and I'm going to throw in another break. Then I'll do a closing parenthesis. Now, what this other break is doing is the list is listing out with breaks the different rules that were broken. But because this is covered for importing and grid edit, there can be multiple records that have broken multiple rules. And so I want each record to have its own kind of little spot. So the first break is going to put a break between rules. This second break is going to put a break between records. And again, we'll test it out and I'll show you, and I'll highlight where those breaks are happening. But it's all about ease of use and really just kind of comprehension for the end users that they can see everything. So I'm going to have to zoom in. I hope everybody can still see this, but now everything's on the screen here. And I'll hang tight here for a second and kind of see what's going on in chat. Yeah, Paul, you can definitely include data about the record. So like I mentioned, you can include the record ID. So rather than just them getting this message about, hey, you broke this rule, you can throw in record ID in here as well. So you could do like ampersand record ID number. Or or, you know, you could write another note, or like I mentioned earlier, you could have a link. Trial and error. Yeah, there was a little bit. I think we first did this session last fall, and it covered more than just custom data rules, but we had, I think, a 4-hour block. So I think it's changed over time, but there's a little bit of trial and error, figuring out exactly where to put the break and how many we needed. So I'll go ahead and I'll leave the record ID in here, just so that we can see it. And rather than just putting record ID, since it's going to give them a number, which might be more confusing to them, like, hey, what is this straggling number here? We could just throw inside of the message here, record ID number, colon, and then the record. Again, this may not be helpful, but hopefully it's getting the light bulbs going of, hey, this is a formula text box. I can put whatever I want in here. I could put a link to something, you know, whatever your brain's gravitating to for your own apps and your company. If you're not, if you're still looking at this, just say something in chat, like, no, I'm not ready to go. Otherwise, we'll keep moving forward. And then we'll test this one out in grid edit as well. Yeah, yep. So at the top here, we have the, somebody asked, can you explain the double break again? So with the list function, actually, let me open the formula function guide. And I have this in the resources section for everybody in the deck. And actually, you know what? Let me post this in the chat. So that's our formula function guide. And you can see there's 189 functions. We've added several over the past year as well. But you can just search right here. I want to know what the list function is. And here it is. So let's click into this. So it gives you a bunch of info about the function. Yeah, I totally agree, Mark. Yeah, so I just wanted to introduce custom data rules and then say, hey, we can make it even better by listing them out. And you're right, just imagine the end user. You know, if they broke 5 rules and they got one broken rule message at a time, I can understand why they wouldn't want to use QuickBase. So if we list out 5, we're helping them out as much as we can. So here's the list function. You can see it strings or concatenates. Oh, let me zoom in. Probably tiny. Okay. It lists, or it strings together values with a delimiter between them. And you'll notice in this example, they're using hyphen as a delimiter. So it's A hyphen B hyphen D. Here they're using a comma. We used a break because if multiple rules are broken, let's say 5 rules are broken, I don't want all 5 of those rules to be smushed together. It just might be too much to kind of ingest for the end user, or maybe the custom data rules haven't been as clear as we've made them with, you know, rule 1 is this, rule 2 is this. So what we're doing is we're going to be listing each broken rule with multiple breaks so that we get some gap or spacing in between the rule so it's easier for them to understand. And we did that here with breaks. So it'll say, hey, you broke rule 1, 2 breaks so that there's a gap. Hey, you also broke rule 2, same thing, 2 gaps, and then rule 3 and so forth. Or maybe, you know, rules 1, 2, and 9 or whatever you have. Is that helpful? Cool, awesome. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this. And let's exit and we'll jump into grid edit. Go back to the repair tickets. We have to re-add those columns to the report since I didn't save the report. So let's do that again. And let's go grab date to follow up, and let's grab lamp heat level. And let's do grid edit. And you guys can, you know, modify any records you want here. I'll just grab these ones. So again, I'm going to break rule number 1, which is not allowing dates in the past, and then I'll put in a negative 350 value. Next record, I'm going to break the second rule, which is the 30-day window. So we'll throw that, and then we'll throw, maybe they fudged this and they put 1,000 instead of 100. So now if I hit save, you can see these are the breaks. And it may not seem like a big deal, but in my mind, anything like this is really helpful for users. So we can see record 1, which has the 1, that doesn't help at all. Record 1 here, and it broke rule 1 and it broke rule 3. And then I think it was, yeah, Paul asked if we can add data from the record. And yeah, you can see record ID 1 right here. So that was that last thing that I added. Now it doesn't show up in the other rules because I didn't add that portion to it. So you can see record 1 broke rules 1 and 3. You could even add another break here if you wanted, so that there's more of a gap between the first record and the second record. Again, it's all about preference here on what you want to do. And then the second record broke rules 2 and broke rules 3. Let me clear this out. Oh, okay. And then we can hit OK, and now we know, oh, hey, look, these are the 2 records. I broke both of these things. So let's just put in today's date. We'll put in another date that's within the 30-day window, and we'll do 150 and 100. And then we can, oh no, what did I do? Custom data rule failed. Oh, I wonder, hold on. Yeah, exactly. I think it's something within the within where I put that break. So yeah, everybody can see Eric's question, but he's saying, hey, did that error come from the final break? And it may have. Let's take this out and see what happens. And I'll take the record ID out just for now so that everything matches the formulas in the appendix. Okay, so we'll save that. We'll hit exit again. And let's just do next week, and then we'll do 150 since that's within the range. We can do 150 again. There we go. So we're good. So something I did with the formatting in that last break, it wasn't happy about. So I'll leave that out for now. Oh, and we can, yep.
I'm sorry, there's a question that you might want to answer for everybody. But
Yeah.
it was asked, why do you need double breaks at the beginning, but only 1 at the end?
Oh, you don't. It's again, it's all about preference. Maybe you only want 1 line in between the rules, but 2 lines in between the records so that you can see kind of the break between records more. Maybe you don't want any breaks between the rules and you're okay with them kind of being one after the other, but you do want breaks between the records. It's all personal preference. This was mostly just to show that not only can you list out the rules, but that were broken, but you can also put a gap between them if you want. And you know, our use case is pretty small here with only 3 rules. And for everybody who's used form rules, you know you can get up to a decent number of form rules that abort the save or whatever. So, you know, if you imagine having 10 or 15 custom data rules here, it's just helpful for the end user to kind of split everything out. Paul's asking if rich text formatting can be used in the error messages. Kirk, maybe you want to jump in on this one. I've never used rich text in custom data rules. Yeah, HTML is fine since you can use that in formula text, and since we did that with the delimiter.
I've added some rich text in them, and you can add them in there.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah. There was a question earlier that I thought was kind of unique, and the desire was, if I in the administrator, I don't want these rules to be invoked on me, but I want all the other people to do it. So how do you do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And before I answer that, since we do have a hard stop here shortly, I just want to jump over to our resources slide. And again, you'll have access to all this. Let me just throw all 4 of them up here. Our university is where prior Empower sessions recordings are available, as well as our certification program. If you want to talk to somebody about formula help, custom data rule help, reports, whatever, you can contact our support team by opening a case. If you want to share stuff with other builders or see what other builders are doing, so non-QuickBase folks, although we are on there, but it's mostly other QuickBase builders that are active, you want to head over to our community. And then lastly, I know you can't really like copy this URL, but I did throw it in the chat earlier, and I'll throw it in there again, but that's just a link to our formula function guide. And again, that'll be available here as well. Yeah, so that's the end of the exercises and the resources. The last up is the Q&A, which we've only got a couple minutes for, and then the appendix at the end. But I do want to answer Kirk's question, since it does fall in line with our Q&A. And what you can do here is you can use our user roles function, which is something we came out with, I believe, in September. Because as an admin, maybe you don't care. Maybe you need to override some of these follow-up dates, or maybe the text managers are able to put up follow-up dates in the past. But you want to leverage our user roles function. And it has a couple modes. One of them is name. So what you would do is you would put in the name of the role. So maybe repair tech. Oops, gotta do quotes. Okay, hold on. And we want, or you can, sorry, getting ahead of myself, or you can use ID. So maybe you change the name of your roles over time, or you just do sometimes. If you were to do that, this would then fail. So I highly recommend using the role ID rather than the role name. What am I doing here? Oh, here we go. Okay. So what user roles does is it'll grab the name or the ID of all of the roles that user is in. So if I was a tech, this right here, let me just delete this for now. This would spit out 10. And now I want to say, if all of those role IDs that were spit out includes 10, and today is greater than the follow-up date, and the ticket status is not equal to completed, then submit or throw up the rule or the error. So what this means is, if I'm an admin, I'm not in the tech or the repair tech role, so this rule is not going to fire for me. So as an admin, I essentially ignore it. Only the people in this role are going to have that fire for them. Hope that helps. It looks like we're going to get cut off here pretty shortly. So I did want to thank everybody for attending. I hope you guys have had a great Empower and you enjoy the rest of the sessions today. We'll throw up this recording up on the platform so you have access to it. You can always join us in the Slack if you have any questions. I'm actively in there, so you can find me in there, and I'd be happy to answer any questions we didn't get to. It is 2 o'clock, so I think we're gonna get shut down here. But thank you, everybody. I hope you found this of value and you learned about custom data rules today.
Thanks, Daniel.
Yep. Thank you, everybody.